Om Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Krito Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Dhamma Pranavarthaya Shuddha Jnanaikamurtaye Nirmalaya Prashantaye Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. In the Dvitiya Adhyaya, which is the real gist of all the Upadesha, it is where Yamadharmaraja answers Nachiketa's doubts and questions, both in terms of is there something after the body falls, which is the simplest of the questions. The answer is yes, end of story. But he continues that question by saying that which is not subject to dharma, papa, punya, not subject to time, not subject to anything else. And all that is answered. And every now and then, Dharmaraja will say, Yetad Vaitat, this is it. This is what he asked for. With this, actually, the Upadesha is complete. But repeatedly, Shastra tells us, and we know, that by hearing it once, twice, thrice, you may still not get it. You may still get the meaning of the words. But our propensity to look at everything as an object and try our best to understand the object. When I say object, tangible or intangible, doesn't matter. Very, very strong. It is not yesterday or today's conviction that everything has to be looked at as an object. Not only this lifetime, God knows how many more lifetimes we have lived life looking at everything very as an object. But when you start looking at, say, okay, that's fine, I can understand the object. That object knowledge also has a lot of limitations. Firstly, that object knowledge can change. Science is a typical example. We know that the so-called scientific facts that we establish, on which our entire lifestyle is based, technology development is based, all the other discoveries and inventions in science are based, they themselves undergo change. Medical science is a classical example which all of us have experienced. You say something once today, and then a few years later, you say, no, change that. This is not good for your body. Change something else. Every scientific fact is like that. So any object knowledge is subject to change. Object knowledge can also disappear. Very important. Because object knowledge is based only on one's own capacity of the brain. It can disappear. If the brain function or the memory function disappears, object knowledge can disappear. Some of you might have seen people who get into dementia. Very knowledgeable people in a particular field. See what happens every day. Let us take a musician. A musician who has understood the intricacies of his music goes to sleep. All that knowledge is manifest. But when he wakes up, that knowledge is again available to him. It's manifest. But there are situations when he can actually completely lose it. So it is losable knowledge. A third problem with the material or object knowledge is you can never say on any one subject that I know everything. No, sir. You find scientists of a very high order, they understand this. They go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into one particular subject. And then each time they go one step deeper, they realize that there's so much more that they don't know. So this jnanam has no way of anybody to say, I know everything, even in this one particular field that I work on. But this jnanam that we are trying to understand, moksha jnanam, it is not an object knowledge. It is also not a subject knowledge in the sense that I am the subject which has all these body components, all the sense organs, and the brain understands something. That is also still something I understand as a subject. But when I say subject, in the sense that I know the field of botany, the I that who knows the field of botany is a subject, is also an object. What we are talking about is neither subject nor object. What we are talking about is that which makes the subject a subject in the Jagat and makes an object an object. That knowledge, which is neither knowledge nor ignorance, and nothing in between, but all of them are sustained by that jnapti, is what we are trying to understand. That knowledge, once gained, unfortunately, fortunately, it has been gained only through the buddhi, because that's all the only instrument we have available. But to gain that knowledge in this Adhyaya 2, in the first valli we saw, he talks about Sukshma Buddhi. What is Sukshma Buddhi? Sharpened Buddhi. Razor strop Buddhi. How do you sharpen it? First clean it, remove all the mess in there. Then keep polishing, polishing, polishing till it comes to a state where it is now ready to gain that knowledge. Normal buddhi is not adequate. You need to have a buddhi which is called Sukshma Buddhi, but which essentially means a buddhi which is very, very well prepared. Samkrita Buddhi. Ready to receive that knowledge. That is what Sukshma Buddhi means. We use this word Sukshma often in this, sometimes without recognizing what we're using, sometimes maybe thinking about what we're saying when we say Sukshma Buddhi or Sukshma Sharira. But one has to really go into what is a Sukshma. On the surface, we say what is intangible. Something I can touch, feel, see, etc. is tangible, but something I can't is intangible. So in this chapter, there's a certain amount of emphasis on that as a point. With this Sukshma Buddhi, the other point that this chapter brings out very well, this Valli, is that by pure repetitive understanding or repetitive misunderstanding, if you want. We see Veda, Jiva Veda. Therefore, I see difference between me and the other person and an animal or whatever else. I see the Jiva Veda. I am one, he or she is different, that animal is different. And we also see Jiva Jagat Veda. How can I look at I and non-I as the same? And because this Veda is there, Jiva Veda and Jiva Jagat Veda, automatically Jiva Ishvara Veda also is there. This differences we see, Shastra calls Nanatvam. And it is so entrenched in our buddhi that we see this Nanatvam despite all that we study about Aikyam. Therefore, we understand the Aikyam word meaning. But to understand is as that I is Ishvara, that I is the entire Jagat Karanam, that I is neither Karanam nor Karyam. Otherwise, our whole attitude is, I am Karya. And there's a Karanam on which I arose. So this Sukshma Buddhi has to be able to show us or allow us to see that there is no Nanatvam. There is only Aikyam. And therefore, Shastra repeatedly says this in so many different ways, hoping that our buddhi, as it is getting prepared more and better, is able to see this. Fortunately, Shastra tells us, you will see it. All you have to do is commit yourself to this knowledge. All you have to do is submit yourself to the Shastra as a pramana. And Shastra says you will get it. That sentence, you will get it, means what? That you is no more. That is what you getting means. The whole sentence is changed. You remove you, it's only get it. There is no you. And yet the you has to continue. That's why when Bhagavan talks about the what he calls the yogi in the 6th chapter, Dhyana Yoga or Atma Samyamya Yoga, says this yogi sees because he is ready to see. This yogi sees the Aikyam. Hey, if I see the Aikyam, that's subject-object. No. That's where the difficulty is. Aparokshataya, I see that. Then Samabuddhi comes. Samatvam is there. Otherwise, Samatvam is only a word. Therefore, such a person will see Samatvam. That ability to see is called Samyak Darshanam. See only the oneness everywhere. At that time, all the glories we talk about Bhagavan are my glories. Because I am no different from Bhagavan. I will reword that. I is no different from Bhagavan. The moment I say I am, I'm still talking about a I which has ego-driven. When this knowledge appears, I love Swamiji's words, the ego is now an enlightened ego. It is still there because the body, Sharira continues. And Sharira cannot operate without an ego. But it is now a humbled ego, an ego which is enlightened. Therefore, ego continues to operate in the world, perhaps continues to make judgments, but you recognize what is happening. Aham Brahmasmi, Brahmasmi. All this is brought out in this Valli, in this first Valli of the second Adhyaya, where the idea is to recognize the Nanatvam is only because of Upadhi, and the Upadhi varies and is Mithya. This doesn't get registered easily. Despite a lot of Shravanam and Mananam, there is what is called Viparita Bhavana. And that is where we require the support of Shastra and the Guru. We require, before we can come to the state of understanding the grace of Ishvara, only that can help us remove all the obstructions and gain that sukshmatvam of the buddhi, cleansed through karma yoga, sharpened through the adhikaritvam gained through practical living, and finally polished by Shravanam and Mananam. That brings us to the verses in this first Valli of the second chapter, which starts with a very nice mantra saying that all our senses, which are our data collecting agents, are external looking. They can only collect data of external objects. Very interesting. External to what? At that stage, we are talking about external to what I consider as I, which is the Sharira. Anything outside the Sharira. So all these senses are outward looking, go and collect data from outside. With our own capacity, we have enhanced this capability of these data collectors to get very fine details of data, very small, subtle data, very large data, everything, both in terms of time and distance. So we have huge telescopes, Webb telescopes to collect data from the cosmos. We have all kinds of electron microscopes and others to see deep into the atom. All that we've been able to do, but it is still all external. Paranchikhani. And they are all focused on the anatma. In one of the talks, somebody asked me, Swamiji, can I say therefore that the Rishi does the research inwards? There also, like I said, you can collect data from the anatma outside, but you can also collect data anatma inside. What is I? As long as I is restricted to my body, mind, sense complex, that I, which I use in a sentence like, I want to learn the truth, where the truth becomes object, and I, the subject, is still I, the Ahankara-based individual. I have to cross that also. And in crossing that, the very I which is doing the search, which is the sadhaka, the Ahankara of the sadhaka, that has to go. Because that is the knowledge. That is what Shastra is telling us. That has to go. How can it go? The body is still there, F-God still operate. How can that go? Therefore, the subtle buddhi. So he starts with telling us, please recognize that these data collection agents cannot do what is required to gain this Atmajnana. Our start verse 1 and 2 is like that. The very lack of recognition that that is our problem is the problem for many of us. Because we depend on that for everything. We depend on these senses as a pramana. And if you depend on these as a pramana, there is no way you can get this knowledge. So what do I do? Shastra pramana. And that Shastra pramana and the guru, Shastra pramana always will mean Shastra plus guru, has to tell us that there is something to know. That there is a Purushartha beyond Artha, Kama, Dharma. All that is covered. Then the question that what is this? How do we know this? Shastra says, Chakshus Chakshu, Manasa Manaha. Because the senses cannot access it, and sense cannot accept it because that which creates, drives, sustains the senses is the Atma. How is it going to collect the data on the Atma? So once one recognizes the fact that there is an Atma behind all of these senses, then one can start examining where and how do I get that knowledge. That is where pramana, Shastra Shabda pramana becomes necessary. There are a lot of examples are given. Jagrat, Swapna, the Prapancha, all that we have seen. And in that process, this Valli brings a very beautiful concept into play. Where does Mithya stop? Where does Anatma stop? Everything outside the Sharira is Anatma. That's how we start. But I still have the Veda between I and Ishvara. What about Ishvara? What about all the Devatas? All the Devatas are like humans only. Exalted humans. More power, more knowledge. But Devatas are not all knowledge, all power. They are somewhere in the scale. The whole apparent creation starts with Prathamaja, Hiranyagarbha, and Virat and everything else, all the Samashti. But they still belong to the Jagat. And when they belong to the Jagat, they're also Mithya. Go one step further. What about Prathamaja? What about Hiranyagarbha? Or what about Virat for that matter? So this Bali tells us Hiranyagarbha, Virat, all of them belong to that only. All, I think from verse 5 onwards, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they're all saying the same thing. Recognize them. Recognize them, then you are the only one left. Or change it again, you is the only one left. And that is the entire Jagat Karana, including the Karanam for my own body and science, mind senses, which are all part of the same Jagat which are created. As though. So everything, Jiva, sentient beings, non-sentient beings, Hiranyagarbha, everything, all the way up, is only Mithya. Oh, does that mean what? It still is Ishvara. What about Ishvara? Is Ishvara Mithya? Ishvara is Brahman. There is no difference. Then how did the word come about? What happens is, when we talk of Ishvara, Ishvara has Ishvaratvam properties. Sarva Shaktiman, Sarvajnaha. Just like we said, Devatas have certain higher level of knowledge than I do in particular fields. They have all knowledge in a particular field. Because they are the samashti, presiding deities of that field. Similarly, when we take all collectively samashti as Ishvara, that Ishvara has all knowledge, all power. That is the properties we have allotted to Ishvara. We've called Ishvara that. You can't separate it because Ishvara has Ishvaratam. How can you separate it? If you separate, physically you cannot separate. But if you understand this, that Ishvaratvam, the moment you add Ishvaratvam properties, you have to add it to something. What do you add it to? That Adhisthana to which we as though add these is Brahman. So Ishvara remains. But the idea of Ishvaratvam is Mithya. Jiva is the same. Jiva remains. Jiva is Brahman. But all that multiple properties we give to Jiva are all Mithya. That is why we see Nana. Because every Jiva has different combination of properties. And therefore we see Nanatvam. And this Valli tells us, in and through all this Nanatvam, including the fact that I and non-I is also Nanatvam. In and through all of them, if one can see that Aikyam, that oneness, then I as a concept, I am disappears. I is left. Because isness is all there is. Our old example continues. You cannot separate gold from the gold ornaments. But what does one see? The buyer of the gold ornaments sees the Nanatvam. So when you pay for a chain 10-gram gold, made of 10-gram gold, and you paid X amount, you paid 100,000. Later you want to return it, you need the money. Go back to the same guy who sold it to you. He doesn't see the Nanatvam. He only sees gold. He says 10 grams of gold. I will give you 85,000. The perspective. He doesn't give you 100,000 because you only saw the nanatvam. He also saw the nanatvam and he sold it to you. Okay. But when he went to return it to him, because he need the money, he said, I don't see any nanatvam. I see only gold. And this knowledge of Aikyam, how do I get? I still am I. I still have the same constituents. Same Sharira, which is a assembled unit with lot of components in there. That component includes all the Sthula components and Shukshma components, including my Buddhi, which is the only instrument I have to understand this subtlety. So the Upanishad also says in this Valli, you can only know it through the mind, manasa eva. And you see that there is only one Brahman, and if there's only one, and I still is there, I am there, I'm calling myself I am, I have to recognize that Brahman is I is. And that can be done only by the Buddhi. A Buddhi which has been thoroughly prepared. Samskrita Buddhi. And toward the end of this Valli, repeatedly he says, Nanatvam is the cause of samsara. Nanatvam is samsara. Anybody who sees Nanatvam, who is unable to see beyond Nanatvam, continues to be born again in a Sharira. Only when one is able to see in and through all of this Nanatvam, the one unchanging Akhanda Brahman, and recognizes that as I, only then does he move out of this samsara. Very beautifully brought out in these very few verses, 15 verses, I think, in this Valli. With this, the thing should be complete. Upadesha should be complete. But it is not. How many of us, having read in detail up to this Valli, can say, I have understood? You can never say I have understood, you know that. But how many can really get this aparokshataya? It doesn't happen. So the Upanishad continues, tries to use a different methodology, tries to use a different angle to show us. Say you start with the Sharira, you have a Sharira which is an assemblage, and no assemblage is created for the sake of the assemblage. You don't create a car for the car's sake. You don't, okay, no, car is inanimate, Swamiji. Okay, you don't create a robot for the robot's sake. A robot is an assemblage, but for somebody else's sake, for their benefit. And if you apply the same principle, this Sharira, which is an assemblage anyway, is also for somebody else's sake. Whose sake is that for? Not for the sake of the individual components or the assemblage itself. So this takes an angle from this perspective and talks about, look at this Sharira and try to understand who is the person for whom this assemblage is created. And in that context, there's a very beautiful example that gives all these imagery that we've seen earlier. Earlier also we saw the imagery of Ratha and a Ratha Swami. Here he takes the imagery of the Sharira. Sharira is a created assemblage. And there is a Swami in the Sharira, who is the Sharira Swami. And this comparison shows that there has to be somebody who gains. Who is this for whom this body has been assembled? Can we recognize that? What are the characteristics of this? So it takes that kind of a approach to try and explain or help us understand and get rid of the Viparita Bhavana. Having established the Paroksha Jnanam, that there has to be one unchanging Vastu. To translate that into a Aparoksha Jnanam, that Vastu has to be I. This chapter, this Valli, tries to remove this Viparita Bhavana. How to understand that Brahman and I as two non-separate things. That is the subject of this Valli. I is, Brahman is, how do I understand the same? Everywhere it is the same. We've been seeing this in Advaita Makaranda. We're doing the same thing. How do we understand the Aikyam? We will look at this in some detail, the second Valli, and see how it presents the same Upadesha from a different angle, different perspective, to help us understand this, assimilate it, and accept the nature of I as Brahman. We will try and do that tomorrow. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Thank you, everybody.
Om Swamiji.
Swamiji.